The dining room froze the second the Bordeaux splashed across her white dress. Crystal glasses hung in midair, conversations died, and every eye turned on me. My hands shook against the linen, but my voice came out steady. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm so deeply sorry." And in that silence, I waited for her verdict. The chandeliers at the Grand Meridian gave off a soft, expensive glow, the kind of light that flattened nerves and sharpened silverware. Conversations rose and fell like careful tides around centerpieces, and every table seemed to hold a handshake that might turn into a contract. Chicago's leaders had come dressed in confidence. The room smelled faintly of saffron, seared beef, and old money. It was the kind of night where a person could feel the weight of being seen, or the relief of being invisible. Marcus Chun moved with the muscle memory of long shifts and longer semesters. The starched collar, the tray balanced just above his shoulder, the precise turn of the wrist that kept Crystal from chiming. None of it happened by accident. 3 years of fine dining service had taught him that grace was a practiced thing, made of small corrections and quiet breaths. He checked the stemware for prints that weren't there, fixed a napkin fold that didn't need fixing, and felt steadier for doing it. He was 32, a single father paying for night classes one plate at a time, and somewhere across town his 8-year-old daughter was finishing her homework at the neighbor's kitchen table, chewing a pencil and humming like she always did when she concentrated. He pictured her bright, serious face. It made him stand a little taller. The summit had a choreography of its own. A speaker rapped a story with a laugh. A table loosened. Servers flowed in. Marcus tracked the pattern without looking like he was tracking anything at all. He adjusted the angle of a chair so the next guest wouldn't stumble. He noted which executives emptied their water glasses during tense moments, which ones kept their hands away from the wine when negotiations thinned. He had started his degree because he wanted to understand why systems failed. He stayed in hospitality because it let him watch people, how they cracked under pressure, how they recovered, how they treated those who couldn't answer back. A hush rippled from the dais as tonight's keynote settled at table 7. Marcus clocked the cluster of black suits, the quiet gleam of a designer dress, the attentive angle of heads turned toward one person, Elena Rodriguez. Even across the room, the center of gravity shifted slightly in her direction. Colleagues leaned in as if the table itself had drawn closer. Reputation traveled faster than a spotlight. Marcus had heard enough from regulars to know she demanded excellence and got it. He reset his grip on the tray, measuring out the weight of Bordeaux and expectation. He let the room's sound guide his pace. The low clink of forks, a burst of laughter, the discreet swish of the sommelier's cart. The Grand Meridian trained its staff to be present without intruding, but presence takes work. Marcus breathed in for 4, out for 4, and the tray felt lighter. He switched to his service hand, lifted a linen over his forearm, and ran one last mental checklist. Labels facing the guest, bottle cradled, eye contact, name confirmed, pour measured, no drips. Control what you can control. The rest is timing. At the service station, he glanced at his watch and did a quick Sophia math. Bedtime plus neighbor's patience plus his commute if he caught the late train. He would text during the dessert course, when the room softened and no one noticed the staff. He pictured the sticker chart on their fridge, the crooked stars she'd draw for Dad got home before 10. He tucked the thought away like a spare match, something to strike if the night ran cold. Table 7 waited with its own stillness. Elena's team spoke in low fragments, the kind of clipped, tactical phrases that fit neatly into calendars. Marcus caught a word, pipeline, maybe compliance, and then shut it out. Service wasn't performance, it was concentration. He eased the bottle from its cradle, wiped the lip, and set Elena's glass just slightly apart. A breath of space to announce the pour without making a show of it. White dress, hair pulled cleanly back, posture like a measuring rod. Power expressed itself in how little it moved. He tilted the bottle, found the angle where gravity cooperated, and let the Bordeaux ribbon into crystal. The color was a deep, disciplined red, the kind that promised structure and patience. For a heartbeat, the room aligned. His wrist steady, the glass accepting, the bottle obedient. This was the comfort of a perfect step in a practiced routine. All the margin he owned lived in moments like this. Then a neighboring table brightened with an animated gesture. A story punctuated by an elbow lifted a degree too high. Motion brushed the air near his shoulder. Marcus felt, more than saw, the slight jolt that unbalanced the world by a fraction. He corrected, but fractions were enough. The telltale slip of liquid broke from the clean line of the pour. He didn't look down yet. He did what training had taught him. Right the bottle, set it safely, reach for the linen. The room's sound shifted in an instant from conversation to vacuum, as if the chandeliers had inhaled. Every eye, every appetite, turned to table 7. Marcus kept his face calm because panic never helped anyone, and because he had a daughter who copied what his face taught her about fear. He drew a breath that tasted like tannin and apology. Across from him, Elena Rodriguez's immaculate white had been interrupted by burgundy. The stain unfurled like a map made in a single stroke. Around them, silence arranged itself into rows. Marcus felt the future narrow to a point and steadied his voice before it broke it open. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said quietly, linen at the ready, "I am so deeply sorry. This was entirely my fault." And the room waited to see what came next. The burgundy liquid struck the white fabric like ink across untouched paper. The splash bloomed in slow motion, each drop widening into a spreading stain. Elena Rodriguez sat perfectly upright, her posture unbroken, the only movement in the scene the relentless creep of Bordeaux into silk. Around her, the dining room fell into stunned silence. Conversations that had been full of deal-making and laughter stopped mid-sentence. Glasses hung in the air, and forks paused inches above plates. In an instant, Marcus Chun became the center of attention. Marcus's training told him what to do: stabilize the bottle, set it safely on the tray, press a linen into service. His instincts told him something else, that his career might have just ended in front of the most influential crowd he had ever served. His heart beat so heavily he felt it in his throat, yet his face remained composed. A waiter who flinched made guests more uncomfortable. A father who panicked taught his daughter the wrong lesson about mistakes. He thought of Sophia in that split second, her voice asking him last week, "Daddy, what happens if you mess up at work?" He had told her mistakes happen, but what matters is how you handle them. Now, he had no choice but to prove it. He bent slightly forward, towel poised, and spoke in the low, measured voice of someone who refuses to abandon dignity, even while standing at the edge of disaster. "Ms. Rodriguez, I am so deeply sorry," he said. "This was entirely my fault, and I take full responsibility." The words were simple, but every person at table 7 heard the steadiness in them. He did not plead. He did not shift the blame to the careless gesture from the neighboring table. He did not grope for excuses. He owned the mistake completely, knowing Elena Rodriguez's reputation for zero tolerance, for perfection that left no room for error. Elena lowered her gaze to the spreading stain on her dress. She lifted her hand slowly from her lap, her expression still unreadable. It was the pause before a verdict, and everyone knew it. At the next table, a fork clinked softly onto china. Across the room, a server stopped in place, eyes fixed on Elena as though her reaction would decide the future of all of them. Marcus's palms sweated under the white linen. He thought of the rent check waiting on his kitchen counter, the tuition payment due at the end of the month, Sophia's smile when she waved her goodnight before he left for his shift. He had built his world on a fragile balance of small victories. One burst of anger from Elena Rodriguez could send it all crashing down. The room leaned forward collectively, waiting for the explosion of rage that her reputation promised. But Elena Rodriguez did not speak. She simply looked at Marcus, long enough for him to feel every ounce of her authority pressing on him. He could hear the faint hum of the chandelier bulbs, the sound of his own breath in his ears. He braced himself for the words that would end his time at the Grand Meridian. Instead, Elena exhaled slowly through her nose and straightened the fold of her napkin. Her lips parted, not in reprimand, but in something unexpected. She began to laugh. The sound started softly, a warm ripple breaking the hush. Elena Rodriguez tilted her head back slightly, her dark hair gleaming under the chandelier light, and laughter poured from her lips. It was not the sharp, cold laugh of derision that many in the room had braced for. It was genuine, almost melodic, laughter that carried the startling weight of relief. The surprise of it struck harder than any reprimand could have. Executives at her table blinked, their mouths half open, as though someone had torn the expected script in half right in front of them. Elena rose from her chair, pressing her palm lightly against the ruined fabric. The red stain spread boldly across her white dress, impossible to ignore, yet she looked at it with something close to amusement. "You know what?" she said, her voice carrying easily in the silent dining hall. "This is probably the most interesting thing that's happened to me at a business dinner in years." The corners of her eyes creased with mirth as she gestured lightly at the dress, inviting everyone to share in the absurdity of the moment. A current of uncertain chuckles began at nearby tables. The tension that had wrapped the dining room like cellophane started to loosen. Yet most guests still watched closely, unsure if this sudden playfulness was a mask for the storm that might yet come. Marcus remained motionless, towel still in hand, his body caught between instinct and disbelief. His training had never prepared him for a response like this. His first thought was that her composure was a prelude, that her laughter was only the calm surface before a devastating outburst. But as her shoulders shook lightly with amusement, he realized she was not performing. Elena Rodriguez was genuinely laughing at herself, at the situation, at the absurdity of treating fabric as more valuable than the moment. She waved a hand toward him, her tone light, but firm enough to still command the room. "Sir, please don't worry about this. Accidents happen, and frankly, this dress was so expensive that wearing it was making me nervous." Her remark landed with unexpected humor. A few bold voices in the room laughed along, then more followed. The tension cracked and dissolved like glass under heat. Marcus let out a controlled breath, though his chest still tightened with disbelief. He had prepared for anger, humiliation, even termination. What he had not prepared for was grace. Elena glanced down again, her lips curved in a half-smile. "Anyway," she said, "now I can actually relax and enjoy the evening." She turned the fabric outward slightly, displaying the deep burgundy blotches like a fashion experiment. "Besides, I think red wine might actually be an improvement on this particular shade of white. What do you think?" The remark was so unexpected that Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him. For a moment, he could only stare, caught between professional restraint and the human urge to laugh with her. When he finally spoke, his words came carefully measured, his tone respectful yet softened by astonishment. "Ms. Rodriguez, you're being incredibly kind, but please allow me to arrange for professional cleaning or replacement of your dress. The hotel will absolutely cover all costs." Elena's hand cut the air gently, dismissing the suggestion. "That's completely unnecessary," she said. Her tone carried no trace of irritation, only a matter-of-fact finality. Then she looked directly into Marcus's eyes, and her next words carried an entirely different weight. "What I would like, however, is for you to tell me your name and something about yourself." Anyone who can maintain such dignity and professionalism under pressure clearly has character worth knowing. A ripple of surprise spread across the nearby tables again, but this time it was mixed with curiosity. The feared perfectionist CEO had just shifted the spotlight from disaster to dialogue. Marcus's throat tightened. For years, he had been invisible in rooms like this, a silent part of the backdrop against which the powerful negotiated their futures. Now one of those very people was asking to see him, not as a waiter, but as a man worth hearing. Marcus steadied the tray against his palm, though his grip no longer felt entirely certain. The question, "Tell me your name and something about yourself," hung in the air heavier than the Bordeaux bottle. He cleared his throat, realizing that every surrounding ear was angled toward him. His identity had always lived in the margins at events like these. He was the silent figure in crisp attire, the one who refilled glasses without comment, who made sure the plates left the kitchen and arrived steaming and intact. To step out of that invisibility now felt like standing suddenly in a spotlight. "My name is Marcus Chun," he said evenly, though his voice carried an undertone of humility that only Sophia would have recognized as pride carefully held in check. "I've been working here for 3 years while finishing my business degree at night school." His words landed gently on the linen-draped table, and for the first time since the spill, his heart did not race. He felt, instead, the honesty of his own story anchoring him. Elena's dark brows rose slightly, the smallest signal of genuine interest. "A business degree?" she asked, leaning back into her chair despite the stains spreading across her dress. "What's your area of focus?" Her tone had shifted. It was no longer the polite curiosity of a guest humoring a waiter, but the sharpened attention of a leader probing for substance. Operations management and customer service excellence, Marcus replied. He surprised himself with how readily the words came, as though he had been waiting for years for someone to ask, not just out of courtesy, but because they truly wanted to know. The edges of his nervousness softened, replaced by a quiet confidence. He had poured countless hours into textbooks after long shifts, scrawled notes at Sophia's bedside while she drifted off to sleep. To speak of it here was to give that hidden labor a voice. Fascinating, Elena said, and there was no mistaking the sincerity in her tone. She gestured lightly toward the seat beside her, not for him to sit, but as if to open a conversational circle around him. Tell me, Marcus, what have you learned about customer service from working in hospitality? I'm always interested in operational insights from people with frontline experience. Around them, the dining room resumed its hum, though Elena's executive team had not looked away once. Their CEO was known for extracting efficiency from complex systems, for cutting through data with a surgeon's precision. That she now sought wisdom from a waiter was as bewildering as her laughter had been minutes earlier. Marcus sensed the disbelief pressing in from their gazes, but he steadied himself and allowed thought to rise above nerves. Well, Marcus said slowly, measuring each word as if it were another careful pour. I've learned that how people handle problems tells you more about their character than how they handle success. The guests who treat service staff with respect during difficulties are usually the ones who run the most successful operations in their own businesses. Elena nodded approvingly, her eyes glinting with a spark of recognition. That's exactly the kind of insight I mean, she said. Her fingers tapped lightly against the tablecloth, a gesture of thought rather than impatience. Tell me, what made you choose operations management as your specialty? Marcus glanced briefly around the room. Other servers were already tending to his abandoned tables, a silent show of teamwork that reminded him why he had lasted so long in this industry. It freed him, if only for a moment, to speak honestly. I'm fascinated by how small improvements in systems can create exponentially better outcomes for everyone involved, he said. Whether it's reducing wait times in a restaurant or streamlining communication in a corporate environment, the principles are surprisingly similar. For the first time that night, Marcus felt a sense of balance, not the delicate one required to carry glasses and plates, but a deeper kind. He was being weighed not by a mistake, but by his insight. And Elena Rodriguez, whose approval could bend the arc of careers, was listening intently. Elena studied Marcus with an expression her executives rarely saw, a quiet, contemplative curiosity. For years, she had built her company on flawless presentations, spotless execution, and a relentless drive toward control. Yet here, in the wake of a ruined dress, she found herself intrigued not by perfection but by the grace in Marcus's imperfections. Marcus, she said at last, her voice steady but touched with something softer. I'd like to offer you an opportunity. The words made the men and women at her table glance at one another, their surprise only half hidden. Rodriguez Industries is always looking for people who understand both theoretical business principles and practical implementation. Would you consider interviewing for a position in our operations department? For a moment, Marcus thought he had misheard her. A career opportunity, offered in the middle of a dinner service, in front of people who would never remember the waiter's name once the night ended. His hand tightened slightly around the towel, grounding him. Only hours ago he had left Sophia with the neighbor, promising her that every long night was for something better, better schools, better choices, a better life. Now, suddenly, that vague promise had been given shape. Ms. Rodriguez, Marcus began, catching himself before his voice betrayed his disbelief. He drew in a breath, forced his tone into calm respect. I'm honored by your offer, but I have to ask, why would you consider hiring someone based on a conversation that started with me ruining your dress? Elena's lips curved into a knowing smile. It was the kind of expression that revealed why she had become not just powerful, but respected even by those who feared her. Because, Marcus, she said, leaning slightly forward, in the past hour you've demonstrated grace under pressure, personal accountability, intellectual curiosity, and the ability to extract valuable insights from everyday experiences. Those are exactly the qualities I need in my operations team. Her hand brushed lightly across the stained fabric, not as an afterthought, but as a deliberate gesture. More importantly, she continued, her tone lowering. You've reminded me of something I had forgotten about myself. I've become so focused on perfection and control that I've lost the ability to laugh at unexpected moments. Tonight, you've reminded me that some of the best opportunities come from situations that initially seem like disasters. Marcus felt the floor steady beneath him in a way it hadn't since the spill. This wasn't pity, nor was it indulgence. Elena Rodriguez was not offering charity. She was offering recognition. His mistake had become a doorway. He inclined his head, his voice firm now. Then I would be grateful for the chance, Ms. Rodriguez. At the edges of the dining hall, conversations had fully resumed. To most guests, the crisis was already fading into memory. But at table 7, a single father and a billionaire CEO had shifted the course of each other's lives. Winter had turned to spring in Chicago by the time Marcus Chun adjusted his tie in the mirrored doors of Rodriguez Industries headquarters. The marble lobby bustled with the footsteps of professionals hurrying between meetings, but Marcus no longer felt like an outsider passing through someone else's world. He walked with measured confidence, a company badge clipped to his jacket pocket, Junior Operations Manager. 3 months had passed since the wine spill that nearly ended his career, but instead redirected it. In that time, Marcus had traded late-night shifts and sore feet for early strategy sessions and whiteboards filled with process flows. His first projects had been modest, small adjustments to communication protocols, refinements to workflow handoffs. But even those changes had saved Rodriguez Industries time and money, enough to be noticed in quarterly reports. More than that, Elena had noticed, and she was not one to hand out praise lightly. At home, the shift was even more profound. Sophia had transferred to a school district with better resources, where she came home excited about science experiments and library books instead of worksheets she found boring. The sticker chart on the fridge had grown cluttered with gold stars, not because Marcus got home before midnight, but because he was there to help with homework, to cook pasta on Tuesdays, to listen when she practiced her lines for the class play. The long nights of exhaustion had been replaced with evenings that felt whole. Marcus still woke early out of habit, sometimes standing at the kitchen counter with coffee while Sophia slept, marveling at how quickly life had pivoted. He hadn't stopped being careful. Bills were still calculated, hours still balanced, but the weight on his shoulders was lighter now. It was not just survival anymore. It was progress. Elena's transformation was subtler, but just as real. She began to notice how her own pursuit of perfection had blinded her to potential. Marcus's success within the company became her reminder that brilliance could come from unexpected places. When hiring discussions arose, she was the one suggesting unconventional candidates, former teachers, hospitality managers, even a nurse transitioning into administration. Each time, she reminded her team that skill was important, but character often carried the hidden strength that numbers could not predict. Her executives murmured at first, skeptical of her choices. Yet one by one, those hires solved persistent problems with fresh eyes. A logistics bottleneck was cleared by someone who once managed a hospital ward under pressure. A customer communication overhaul began with lessons drawn from a school principal's daily routines. What started as Marcus's opportunity grew into a philosophy that rippled through the company. For Marcus, mentorship had come quietly. Elena did not sit him down for formal lessons. Instead, she challenged his proposals in meetings, pressed him to defend his reasoning, and, when he did, acknowledged his growth with a brief nod that meant more than any speech. Their relationship had become one of mutual benefit. He offered practical insight from the front line. She sharpened his thinking and pushed him toward broader vision. When he tucked Sophia into bed at night, Marcus sometimes thought back to that moment under the chandelier, the spill that froze a room. What had seemed like the end of stability had instead become the beginning of something he had only dreamed about. Company meetings at Rodriguez Industries carried a different cadence now. Where once every agenda item had been weighed down by perfectionist scrutiny, there was space for humor, for unexpected ideas, for acknowledgement that value could come from places the boardroom had never considered. Elena Rodriguez herself sometimes reminded her team of that truth by referencing what she had come to call the wine spill principle. She would lift her glass during a strategy session, tilt it slightly, and say, "Remember, some of our greatest insights don't come from avoiding mistakes, but from how we respond when they happen." The first time she said it, her executives chuckled politely. The second and third times, They nodded knowingly. By the fourth, it had become part of the company's shared language, a shorthand for resilience and perspective. For Marcus, the phrase carried weight beyond corporate philosophy. At home, he kept one white dress shirt from his service days folded in the back of his closet. Across its chest bloomed a faint red shadow, the stubborn stain that professional cleaners could never quite erase. He had considered discarding it, but instead he preserved it like a talisman. To him, it was not a reminder of failure, but of the turning point that had rewritten his life. Whenever he felt overwhelmed by new responsibilities or doubted his place in a conference room full of executives, he would run his hand across that faint stain and remember that dignity in the worst moment had carried him to the best. Sophia, too, noticed the change in her father. She no longer saw him only through the blur of late-night returns. She saw him in the mornings, making pancakes, quizzing her on spelling, or listening with full attention as she explained why she wanted to join the robotics club. Their home no longer felt like a holding pattern. It felt like a life moving forward. Elena, in turn, had rediscovered a balance she hadn't realized she had lost. The perfectionist CEO known for her sharp edge had remembered what it felt like to laugh at herself. In choosing laughter over anger, she had not only salvaged a dinner, but reshaped the way she led. Where she once demanded control, she now cultivated potential. Where she once feared mistakes, she began to see them as catalysts. The story of that night at the Grand Meridian spread quietly among employees. Some repeated it as a lesson about humility, others as proof that leadership was about more than strategy. To Marcus, it was simpler. Success had not come from avoiding mistakes. It had come from standing tall in the middle of one and showing character when it mattered most. The waiter who had once feared a ruined dress had become the operations manager who helped shape a company. The CEO who had once silenced rooms with her standards had become the leader who taught her team that laughter, grace, and perspective were just as powerful as precision. And together, they carried forward the truth written not in ink or contracts, but in red wine on white fabric. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives are the ones that lead us to everything we didn't know we were waiting for.